It's my joy to share Judge Bailey with you, and I'm going to let him have the podium in just a moment, but I wanted to give a bit of background about him. But before I do that, Suzanne and I, my wife and I, moved to Southern California 7 years ago, and Suzanne now runs the family winery. So we are growing Muscat and Syrah. We have 5 acres under cultivation, and we expect very soon to be the dominant winery in the state of California. if you continue to send us your water. So please do. I want you to know how appreciative we are for that. I'm teaching now. I used to be the dean at Berkeley Law School, and then I was asked to be the dean of the law school at Chapman. So it's both business and law. I'm now a professor, which is the best job in the world, teaching in economics in the spring semester and in law in the autumn. Judge Bailey, it's remarkable to have a person so qualified willing to serve us in this capacity. He was a Superior Court judge for 9 years and gave that up in order to run for Attorney General. That's a remarkable sacrifice. When he was a Superior Court judge, he instituted and then managed special courts to take into account the circumstances of veterans, of adult drug offenders, and of juvenile offenders. Tailoring justice to the particular circumstances of the individual defendant is a compassionate and very effective way of delivering justice and preventing recidivism. And Judge Bailey was a leader in that. Prior to that, for 19 years, he was in the private practice of law, including both civil and criminal. Had 45 full jury trials. So this is a man who will approach the position of Attorney General with profound knowledge of the justice system, both criminal and civil. And as you know, the Attorney General represents the state of California in civil matters as well as in criminal. These qualifications are augmented by his 13 years in state government, 8 of which were spent as the Deputy Director for Legislation for the Department of Social Services under Governor George Duke Majan, who recently passed away, God rest his soul, one of our state's greatest governors. Yes, I think a round of applause for the memory of George Duke Majan. So this is the qualification behind this man who's willing to serve us as Attorney General. And there's one particular reason that I was am enthusiastic about supporting him. And I brought notes. On this I'm going to refer to notes because it's going to amuse you and perhaps sadden you. The role of Attorney General that I'm focusing on is the authority and the obligation to summarize ballot initiatives. Now, for those of us who are not in the majority party in the state of California, we sometimes don't have much recourse except through a ballot initiative. And the process cannot be relied upon if the Attorney General biases the summary that is given to voters when the signatures are being collected. And to the great detriment of the democratic process in our state, that has been the case. So here's my note. This is from the court ruling in the challenge to the initiative to repeal the gas tax. So please note, if you'd like, I'm happy after Judge Bailey speaks later on tonight to talk as much as you like about the gas tax, but that's not my point. My point is if you have an initiative to repeal the gas tax, you might want to mention that in the summary. Here instead is what the current Attorney General summarized the initiative to repeal the gas tax. And this is what the voters would be receiving as they are attempting to obtain signatures and eventually to vote yes or no. This initiative eliminates recently enacted road repair and transportation funding by repealing revenues dedicated for these purposes. Well, my God, I'm against that. This is the sort of thing we get from Attorney General. The other story I wanted to tell is when I was budget director of California, Assemblyman Richmond had a proposal to take our pension program for public employees to defined contribution for new employees, because defined contribution at least gives you some constraint over the unfunded liabilities that defined benefit otherwise creates. And Assemblyman Richmond was told by the Attorney General's office that his initiative to move California from defined benefit to defined contribution would be summarized by that Attorney General's office as eliminating retirement benefits for widows and widowers of police officers slain in the line of duty. I'm not supporting Judge Bailey because he's the most conservative. He and I agree on many things and on some points disagree. I'm supporting him because he is an honest man. He's a fair man. He's superbly qualified for the office, and he will tell the truth. And it's a dang shame that that is not the case that we can describe with our current Attorney General. As I'm strong in my words, but I have a reason for saying so. So won't you join me now in welcoming our state's next Attorney General, Stephen Bailey. Thank you for the, let's see.
Is it on? It is. Thank you for the kind introduction. I want to introduce a couple of other gentlemen that are here that I think deserve an introduction simply because I've been traveling all over California from the border of Oregon down to the border in Mexico. And I know how hard it actually is to go out and campaign in this state. But there's two individuals here that deserve our appreciation. One is Mark Burns. Wade. Mark is running for the Board of Equalization in your district here. So don't forget him on June 5th. And if you've already voted or you're getting ready to vote, make sure you vote for him. And the other one is Alexander Glue. And he's running, what district are you running in?
24.
District 24.
Great. Thank you.
Right here.
Thank you, both of you, for having the courage to stand up and be counted. It's not easy in California. You put your name forward, and there's always someone who's going to take a shot at you. So, I admire you. Thank you for doing what you're doing. And thank you for the very kind introduction. But the Congressman is absolutely right. I spent not quite 9 years, I try to be very precise, 8.5 years as a Superior Court judge here in California. And most judges in this state get pegged into an assignment and never do anything else in their entire career. But where I was serving, I did everything. I did the civil calendar, and I did the criminal calendar. Not all of it, but a good portion of it. I did the probate. I did the juvenile. I spent 4 years as the presiding juvenile court judge in El Dorado County. And the reason I tell you that is that I'm running for California Attorney General. I will be the only candidate, frankly, I am the only candidate running for California Attorney General that's ever tried a death penalty case. I've actually represented people on death row. I understand what it is when you talk to some of these people who have committed really serious, heinous crimes and how manipulative they can be. There isn't anyone else running for Attorney General that has that breadth of experience. But I think one of the areas that is very important in our state, we've reached the point in California where if you don't agree with someone else 100% of the time, you are something less than them. In the 1980s, I was deputy director of the Department of Social Services. I did legislative work for the governor. And I had to deal with Art Agnews and Tom Bates when I say deal with them, I had to sit down and actually talk to them. Because we had things that we wanted to accomplish, both in the administration, but we also wanted to sit down and make California better. We looked at California as something of a public trust. In those days, we still called California the Golden State. And we treated California as if our kids and our grandkids would continue to live in this state. As a judge, for 8.5 years, I saw things begin to deteriorate in this state. Not that there haven't always been problems in California, but we compounded the problems. We started thinking that we could solve problems by not dealing with problems, that we didn't have to talk to one another any longer. As a judge, I started thinking, we've got to change this system. We can't be doing this. Democrats, Republicans, independents, we all ought to be able to sit down and we all ought to leave the room at the end of the day and say, I learned something from the other person. Because that's what we were doing in the 1980s. We were sitting down, we were working on problems, we were creating a solution to them. Didn't always make the solution that worked, but at least we solved a problem at the time, and then we could go back and we could address it later. But that's not what happens in Sacramento today. Nobody talks to one another. Sanctuary state. When's the last time you think the governor talked to a Republican about sanctuary state? Never. Cap and trade. Outside of cutting a deal, that's about the only time, the horse trading that took place in Sacramento was almost embarrassing. But it didn't solve any of the problems. As Attorney General, unlike being a judge, I'll have an opportunity to begin to solve some of California's problems. Things such as the crime rate that is spiking in this state. It's gone up 24% in the last 8 years, based on all the reforms that we've been sold out of Sacramento. And in some places, violent crimes going up at double digits every single year. Our first responders are at risk in this state. It used to be that under 3 strikes, we keep recidivist criminals, those that were serious and violent felons in our prisons. We didn't let them back out on the streets. So what's been happening over the last 4 years as we've been releasing some 30,000 inmates back to the street? And by the way, it's not so bad that you're releasing them back to the street. What's bad is that you don't supervise them when you get them back to the street. And consequently, we see first responders in danger, our police officers at risk. Down in Los Angeles, an officer, Keith Byer, shows up at a minor traffic accident. All he's there is to make sure that traffic is controlled and that everyone is taken care of. And who does he run into? One of the guys that Governor Brown thought he could release back on the street, who, by the way, that morning had murdered 2 of his family members. And so when the police officer showed up, he shot him. But he didn't kill him. He decided to go up and finish the job, and so he assassinated the officer. Those are the kinds of things we have to change in this state. And the current incumbent does not understand that. I was in a debate with him just the other night. And after they had gotten up and made their impassioned speech about they being the 2 Democrats that I'm running against, made their impassioned speech about how we had to reform our criminal justice system, I got up and said, look, when crime's going up at double digits, the policy's not working. And they couldn't understand that. California is in a crisis, but we have an opportunity this year to change it. There have been some surveys that have come out recently, and I want to share that. Luis asked me about this. An independent survey commissioned by One American News, Gravis Marketing did the survey. My campaign is solidly in second place in that survey. And it's consistent with our own internal surveys from April. I was at 21% in that survey. Javier Becerra, the appointed incumbent, was at 28. And you know why I believe we're in that spot? Because the three top issues facing California in 2018 are public safety, and public safety. Californians do not feel safe in their homes. I told a reporter from the San Jose Mercury just the other day, as he wanted to persistently argue over what the crime numbers were. I told him, why don't you get in your car and drive down to San Francisco and walk along the street and look. 42% of the Democrats in this state think we're going in the wrong direction. We can message to Republicans, Democrats, Independents, because crime isn't a Republican issue. It's not an independent issue, and it's not a Democrat issue. Nobody comes to your house when you've been broken into and says, are you a Republican? Or are you a Democrat? They take the report and they go out to solve the crime. And that's what we need as an Attorney General. Someone willing to stand up and go out and solve problems, solve the issue of public safety. And that's what I'm going to do as your next Attorney General. Thank you. But I do want to deal with the topic that the Congressman brought up, because I think that's fundamental in the office. I've always believed that the one office in state government that ought to be handled in a fair and impartial manner is the office of the Attorney General. It's not a partisan office to run for the next office. Unlike all the Attorney Generals we've had in the last 20 years, I'm old enough, I'm probably going to be too old to run for anything else. So I'm not promising, but I'm not, look, my wife told me this is the last campaign. I get to run in this campaign, but I can't promise anything else. But, you know, the bottom line is we need an Attorney General that's going to treat the office as if it were your office, that as if I were your lawyer, not as, you know, a partisan special interest law firm with 1,000 lawyers. And if we run the office of the Attorney General, we can make California proud again. We can make California great again. If we run it in a fair, impartial manner. And that's where writing ballot titles and summaries becomes so important. It shouldn't take a judge, a law professor, or even a lawyer to figure it out. You ought to be able to read ballot titles and summaries and understand them. It ought to tell you if we're repealing the gas tax, that we're repealing the gas tax. It ought to tell you that if we're going to decriminalize drug and property crimes in this state, that we're decriminalizing drug and property crimes, not that you're getting safe schools and streets. Because it didn't have anything to do with safe schools and streets, but they thought they could con you as a voter into voting for it if they just used the word safe, and if they threw in the word schools. It didn't have anything to do with the initiative necessarily, but it made it look really good. We're not going to do that in the new Attorney General's office. I'm going to sit on that office, find people who can be fair and impartial to write our ballot titles and summaries. And that includes on civil issues and on criminal issues. I want you, when I leave that office, to say, we've restored the office. We've restored it so that it's an office for California. And presumably and hopefully we'll never have another Attorney General that treats the office as some partisan office to promote themselves to the next, to the United States Senate or wherever they think they're running. So, having said that, let me open it up for any questions. I will just put one pin in. I need to say we are in second place. But just because we're in second place in the surveys doesn't mean we'll stay in second place. We've got to get voter contact. I need to raise money. And one of the nice things that the Congressman's doing for me today is getting you here so we can talk about that. It's the tough issue that nobody really wants to hear about. But here's the fact of the matter. The Democrats are putting $400,000 into an independent expenditure committee right now. They're running ads around California against me. I've got to be able to counter those. I need your help. The maximum contribution a person can make to this campaign, which makes it really tough for Republicans running in this state, is $7,300. But anything you can do will help right now. And right now is when we need it. June 5th is the election. We have to be in the top 2. I believe we will be in the top 2. We have momentum. The largest union of police officers in the state, the 9,990 member Los Angeles Police Protective League, endorsed me last week. And it was right after that endorsement, that some $400,000 went into an independent expenditure committee, because the Democrats never understood what's happening in the state, and they still don't understand it. We're going to beat them in November, but I need your help in May to get me through June. So, having said that, let's open it up. Anybody have any questions? I know Greg had a lot of questions, so. and we had our debate. Yes, Peter.
Yes, you did mention that you want to make sure that the next Attorney General after you can do the same thing fairly. How can you set up a system in place so that after you leave office, that the person who are doing the ballot statements for the propositions will still be fair?
Well, one of the ways we could do it, we can't do that today, but one of the things that we could do is to rewrite some of the statute that governs this. The Court of Appeal, after the gas tax, after the trial judge told the Attorney General that he had lost confidence in this Attorney General to rewrite the ballot statement, so he wrote one himself. The Court of Appeal said that there's great deference given to the Attorney General in writing ballot statements. What we need to do is to change the statute so it takes some of that discretion away from the Attorney General. We'll sit down. I've worked with the legislature. I know how the system works. We'll have a very aggressive office. I want to put some parameters so that the next Attorney General who decides they're going to write a campaign brochure for one side or the other is limited to just writing it in a fair manner. And we can do that if we change the statute, but it's going to take going to the legislature to do that. Yes?
Prop 47.
Yes. That's the Safe Streets and Schools Act.
$50.
Well, the $950 had actually been passed under the Schwarzenegger administration. They wanted to raise the limit on misdemeanors. What Prop 47, however, did was it wiped out most of the felonies, because it had been things like, burglaries and the like were felonies, but they reduced those down to misdemeanors. And then they allowed stacking of those misdemeanors. So if somebody went to the first store, stole $949, and then went to the next store and stole another $949, and to the next one and stole another, he had 3 misdemeanors as opposed to a felony. They wiped out the recidivism statute. Used to be that if you had on your second, after you had 2 convictions for theft, the next one would be a felony. They wiped that out. So you could have 15 misdemeanor convictions and never get a felony. We're going to change that in November. The Make California Safe initiative that the District Attorneys Association and Crime Victims United are pushing right now, I strongly support that. And that's going to change those laws. It's also going to do some other things, which it's amazing. How many of you here think that felony domestic violence is nonviolent? Well, apparently the Democrats in Sacramento think it's nonviolent. We're going to change that by initiative this year. We're going to change rape of an unconscious person. That is currently not a violent felony in California. It allows sex offenders to be released from prison early. We're going to change that come November. That's going to be a hallmark of my campaign come November. I strongly support that initiative. We're going to bring you other initiatives because that's only a part of the problem. There's other things that need to be fixed here in California. You know, it's one thing, I really hammer in every one of my speeches on this issue of public safety. But there's a second side of it. You know, public safety means eliminating recidivism. You know, if you have a drug addict, you know, when I was charged with the drug court, my goal was rehabilitation. Get a person to the point where they wanted to get into treatment. So when we passed Prop 47, what we did was wipe out the incentive for a person to get into treatment. And when you wipe that out, meaning you no longer have a criminal justice system that can put some pressure on somebody to get them into treatment, what do you think a drug addict now does? He does his 15 to 30 days in custody and then is back on the street getting high again. There's no incentive to go to treatment. There used to be incentive. We're going to change that because it's not compassionate to say that the only way you can beat your drug addiction is to die. And that's what we've got going in California. Why do we have an opioid crisis in this country? It's not all because of pharmaceutical companies and doctors. It's because we have massive amounts of heroin on the street and other opioids. Luis?
You know, you're in Santa Clara County right now, and we have a very interesting measure on the ballot that, quite frankly, I'm still struggling with, which is the proposed recall of a judge based on a decision that he made that some people feel is too light, involving the rape of an unconscious woman. I'm just curious if you have a perspective on that, a framework of how to think about it.
Yeah, there's really
how people
two.
are deciding.
Let me give you first a political statement. From a political standpoint, judges at the trial level, unlike the appellate courts and above, are subject to the vote of the people. They need to, at least in the back of their mind, always realize that they're subject to the will of the people. And so often judges forget that they're only there because you put them there. They think that some politician appointed them. That's not true. You keep them there. And they need to be reminded of that. That's my political statement. Now, was the decision that he made, did he have the discretion to make that decision? He did. You may not like the decision, but he had the discretion to make that decision. Should he have made that decision? My opinion, no. But this is Santa Clara County, and he's the one with all the facts in front of him, all the reports. He didn't do anything that was out of the ordinary. What he did was not realize that he's subject to the people of Santa Clara County. Yes?
So Judge Bailey, there's a lot of criminal justice reform activity going on. They want to change the bail laws. They want, we know there's George Soros active in a number of district attorney races in the state, including in my county, Alameda County, and next door county, Contra Costa County. I'm just curious if there's some aspect of criminal justice that you think needs to be reformed.
Yeah, the first thing is don't hijack a perfectly good word, because reform doesn't mean solving the problem. Reform means emptying the jails, the prisons, and putting people on the street without any supervision. That's, you know, when you have prisoners let out of state prison early, and you don't have a parole system or a probation system that can supervise them, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that they're going to go back to their old ways and continue committing crimes. And the problem is, a lot of the people that have been in state prison custody, their profession, somebody, unlike what you read in the media, I as a judge never took much pleasure in sending somebody to prison. You had to work your way to prison. You had to earn your way to prison. And usually the way you earned your way to prison was you continue to screw up over and over and over again. I might see somebody, 10 times back in front of me for probation violations, probation violation, probation violation, before you throw your hands up and say, there's nothing else you can do about it. They're not going to reform just turning them out onto the street. And that's why crime is going up at double digits. That's why we've had a 24% increase, because we have a whole class of professionals who go back to the street and commit new crimes. And the problem is, they don't just go back to the street and commit the same old, trespass. They go back and they'll commit more serious kids in danger. And until we are willing to step back and say, look, there are some people we just can't trust on our streets. When I represented people, and what the Congressman didn't tell you is that unique to this whole process, I didn't come up as a lawyer through the district attorney's office. I came up dealing with the people who actually commit the crimes. Indigents, people with money, people who were manipulative, people who committed sex crimes. I've talked to them. I understand what they do. I understand how manipulative they can be, because I've actually dealt with them. And when I get to the end, and it affected me when I was a judge, because just because you say, I want treatment, I know you probably don't want treatment that bad, but I may let you do it. And here we are in California. We've let some 30,000 out already. We've got another 50,000 inmates, including sex offenders, that the governor wants to release from state prison. Many of these people you don't want in your neighborhood. And that's where you're going to get them, because they go right back to your county and right back to your streets. So, from a prison or a criminal justice reform, it's not reform. What it is simply sending people back without supervision. And until we correct that and understand that there are people you don't want in your neighborhoods that need to be in the state prison or will be back in the state prison, until we know that and understand it and have somebody that has actually dealt with it, we're not going to be solving these problems. Yes.
Thank you for that important enlightenment. My name is George, and the question I'd like to ask you is that, given the public at large, the relative short attention span, if we are in a role of promoting your good cause to our friends and family, who also have a short attention span, I'd love to know, what are the 3 reasons that I can deliver as to why people should vote for you?
I'm fair. That's maybe number 1. Yes. What are the 3 reasons somebody should vote for me, given the relatively short attention span of voters and even some of our family? I'm fair. I understand what fair is. As a judge, I didn't always agree with the law that I was supposed to follow. Don't have to agree with the law. Nobody elected me king when I was on the bench. Nobody's electing me king to be the Attorney General. So being fair, applying the law uniformly so that you're confident that the law is going to be applied to you the same way it's going to be applied to Jason or to Luis. Having an Attorney General that's not going to pick and choose which laws they're going to enforce. Meaning, just because I disagree with it doesn't mean I get to then say, we'll scrap that one. If I don't like the law, I need to go back to the legislature and sit down. Whether I agree with the mood in the legislature, meaning, do I agree with all the Democrats or the progressives in the legislature? That's not important. I need to go back, sit down with them, and we need to change the law if we disagree with it. And if it doesn't get changed because the legislature disagrees with me, my alternative is bring it to you, the people, as an initiative or a constitutional amendment, or just continue applying it the way the legislature wrote it.
Judge,
Go ahead. Yes.
Judge, a very large percentage of people incarcerated have mental illness. What is your position on reestablishing a state mental hospital?
Well, I think my position on reestablishing state mental hospitals is we need more beds. However, that's not where the solution is, because mental illness is a disease that progresses. It's just like cancer. If you address cancer early on and the doctor finds it and treats it, you can be cured of most cancers now. The same way with mental illness. There are probably millions of Californians right now with very mild cases of mental illness. For example, depression. It's easily treated. But if you don't treat it, it gets worse. And it progresses into what I call the category of moderately mentally ill. And as it moves up that scale, eventually those are the people who can't care for themselves on a daily basis. They're the ones that become the homeless. They go out and commit what I would call the low-level crimes. They're the ones that are laying in the doorway when you try to get into a business. They're laying on the street, sleeping on the street because they can't make it on their own. California needs to do what the progressive state of Texas has done. Now, nobody's ever accused Texas of being particularly progressive. But what they did do, which is unique, and California has never tried, because the promise was made when we closed the state hospitals in the first place, that we were going to do this by setting up these mental health clinics around the state. They didn't do it. If they'd done it 40 years ago, we'd probably not have the homeless problem to the extent that we have now. So what we need in California is to take some of the money that we're paying into corrections and put it into mental health programs that deal through a nonprofit, private mental health system, so that people with moderate cases of mental illness can be treated and we can keep them out of the criminal justice system. Because what we're doing right now is this. We have somebody committing a low-level crime. They get scooped up. They get taken to the local jail. They then sit in the jail. If we can stabilize them in the jail, then we release them right back to the street until they decide that they've cured themselves, and then at which point they go out and commit the same type of offense. We take them back to the jail. We have been using our jails as mental health facilities. Jailers were never trained to be mental health technicians. The jails are not built for that, and people with moderate mental illness don't necessarily need to be in a lockup jail custody. They may need to be locked up eventually, but they don't need to be in a jail. So we need, as Californians, to take a different perspective to the issue of mental illness. The other part of that is that many of the people who are mentally ill are also the drug addicts, because they're using heroin and some of the other drugs to treat themselves. We need to get serious about the problem, or we're not going to address the homeless problem, because those are the people that are the homeless. And we're not going to eliminate, we're not going to address mental illness, because the way the system works now is you have to be essentially a threat to yourself or others before we have a program for you. So you're considered severely mentally ill at that point. I want to address the problem when it's just becoming a problem, not after it's become so severe that you're going to have to reopen state hospitals to put these people. Yes.
Could you please address the sanctuary cities and helping our government, federal government, with the border, and so on, where you stand on that and where you can help out?
I think the sanctuary state legislation is unconstitutional. That's what I think.
Good.
And it's unconstitutional for a very basic reason. Immigration is the purview of the federal government. California is no different than Arizona. We don't get to create our own immigration laws. SB 54, the Sanctuary State Bill, essentially created immigration statutes that I believe are unconstitutional. And because they're unconstitutional, when I'm elected Attorney General, that's the first place I'm going, is to federal court to tell the judge that I believe it to be unconstitutional. As for the border wall, by the way, the lawsuit by the Attorney General, I'm going to dismiss that. I think it's frivolous, and it's frivolous for a basic reason. Congress had exempted the wall from the environmental requirements. That issue was solved maybe 20 years ago. Why we are wasting taxpayer money to sue the federal government over a border wall. The Attorney General couldn't even convince the judge that Donald Trump had insulted to agree with him. I mean, if you've done everything you can to make the judge mad, and you still can't get him to agree, maybe you ought to relook at the litigation. Any other questions? Yes.
We hear that we have a high rate of incarceration, and of course some of the changes you're advocating might put some more people in prison who ought to be in prison.
Right.
And yet we have only so many prisons. So how should we view this? What
Well,
should we do?
here's the public policy issue. You can let them all out and put your life or your kids' lives in danger, because that's what we're getting today through this policy. Or you can create more prison beds if that's what you need, or more programs to take people so that they aren't going to be recidivists. All of that takes a tough public policy decision. I don't want people that are going to go out and prey upon our citizens in our neighborhoods. Some of those, as I said, should never be out of custody. But there may be other programs that we can do in our state prisons. I am not someone that says you lock somebody up forever, but at the same time, don't just wholesalely, because you conjure up a pretend situation, which is, I don't have enough prison beds. If you don't have enough prison beds, go get some more prison beds. If that's really what the problem is. You know, what we did in California is we just filled the prisons up. You know, as a judge, I went through San Quentin. I saw the gymnasium that was full, two double-decked beds where people were just laying and sleeping out there in the gymnasium. That's ridiculous. Should never have happened. I mean, there isn't a judge in the world that wouldn't have ordered them to clear that out. But that doesn't mean that the way you clear them out is to wholesalely open up the door and kick them out on the street. That was the wrong decision that was made. Any other? Well, let me turn it back.
Great. Thank you, Judge. Thank you all for coming. I have a couple of closing remarks. When I'm asked why I support Judge Bailey, I actually have a three-point answer. One, he'll be fair in writing initiatives. Two, he'll keep dangerous people in jail. And three, he won't be suing the President of the United States 24/7, spending money for that purpose. Now, how long does it take to answer that question? So those are three things to distinguish. Secondly, this election is going to be decided in June. The Democratic plan is obvious. They want to get 2 Democrats into the finals. They're going to succeed in a number of the statewide races, I regret to say, in my prediction. I don't want this one to be one of those. The reason is the initiative power. Candidly, the Democratic Party doesn't care which one of the two make it to the finals. They want their candidate to be the Attorney General so they can control that initiative process. This is the time We need to get Judge Bailey into the finals, and then his message will resonate throughout the state. But there's a serious risk, despite the fact he's in #2 spot right now, that they will succeed and have 2 Democrats, and then we'll say in November, how did this happen? And last point of all, the judge is very forthright in asking for help, but that was my job. So you made it easier for me, but I'm going to answer a question that we should have had planted, you know?
Yeah.
So the maximum he told you was $7,300. I'm asking you to contribute 1/10 of that. Now that's a huge number. Why $730? Because it's 1/10 of the maximum, and because that is a significant help to getting him into the position we need in this state. We did not charge anything for the event. It will help us retire the costs so that they're not putting the campaign to a burden for having come to Palo Alto to be with us. And I ask that on the basis of the fact that I'm talking to friends who have given me many dollars more than that over many years. So I know what it is to ask for your help. I would not ask lightly. This is a matter of great importance. I want to thank you very much for what you've done for our state, Judge Bailey, and all the years you've given already in public service. You have our best interests at heart, and I know all of us want to see you continue in the role of public servant in protecting us as Attorney General of our state. Thank you so much.
Tom, you can count on me.